So Kathy, I'm so excited that we get to drive around together, and I will do my best not to get pulled over at any point in time, but I can't promise anything, I guess.
Well,
so, before we jump into questions, first question, you and Dave, your husband, served in Bulgaria for how many years?
10.5 years.
Okay, I thought it was right around a decade, but I couldn't remember if it was more or less. So 10.5 years. And prior to serving in Bulgaria, you both did church work as well, but then you also worked in other jobs as well, other vocations.
Right. I was a social worker for hospice for over 20 years.
Okay.
As also the director of an agency. Dave was in rehab with handicapped children and adults.
He wasn't personally in rehab, or maybe he was in rehab.
Well, you know, he was the director of an agency.
That's probably a clearer way to say that.
People with developmental disabilities.
Some might suggest that he could utilize that as well. So
yes.
You guys did that, then you picked everything up and moved to Bulgaria. Why Bulgaria?
Because we told Global Strategy we'd go wherever they wanted us to go, and we were interested in Eastern Europe because we had traveled in Romania and the Czech Republic and Poland in the early 90s, but we waited and waited for an assignment, and one night I was just looking on the computer and came across Bulgaria, just, you know, as like a place where NATO had bases and we're going to have bases. Because I was thinking, if we never get assignment, I could work as a social worker for the Department of Defense. And just do church work wherever that was.
That's so smart.
Bulgaria came up, and we saw this ancient Roman theater and the Black Sea and mountains, and I called Dave to the computer and said, but Bulgaria looks really interesting. And, you know, it's a former communist place. And went to work the next day, and Dave called me and said, you know, come home, Kathy. And I said, what's wrong? He said, nothing's wrong, just come home. And when I got there, he said, we just got an email from Global Strategy, and it's asking us if we would accept an assignment to Bulgaria.
No way. Of all places in the world.
Really.
Oh, that's awesome.
So we felt like God just laid that out for us. And so we said, yes.
Yeah.
And we were told, no, just take about 6 weeks to pray about it. And we said, God told us yesterday.
Yeah, we're already aware of this.
We're going.
So, you spent 10 years in a country. I think that when you have opportunities to spend that long and you learn the language, there's always fun, like cultural things that you experience, but also, you know, I think sometimes we have a view of missionaries as if they're like superhuman. And one of the things that I think helps us remember that we're all human in this is to hear stories of just cultural mistakes and things that happen. So do you have any, and I know you have them because I've heard these stories, but I'm going to ask as if I don't know these stories, but you know, any cultural mistakes or things that have happened in Bulgaria that you would share that are just funny?
So a cultural mistake that I seem to have made over and over is assuming that what was logical to the Western American mind would be logical in Bulgaria.
Sure.
One particular time I remember we were driving Dorina, one of our youth, home after a youth event. Dorina was blind from birth, so she hears what's going on but can't see what's going on.
Yeah.
And we went down a ramp to get onto a 6-lane divided boulevard, and when we get to the bottom of the ramp, there's a barrier that says street closed. And we can't back up the ramp because it's full of cars. And so Dave and I were trying to decide what to do. I said, you know, I could just hop out, move the barrier a little so we can squeeze around and get in the opened westbound lane. So I hop out of the car and go over to the barrier and, you know, started to push it. And this man comes running toward me, you know, telling me, don't touch it, don't touch it. And I'm saying, well, there's no place to go. You know,
what's the alternative here?
You should have put the closed street sign at the top of the ramp. But this guy had a pickaxe in his
Oh,
hand.
wow.
And
So he was serious.
as I'm moving the barrier, he's raising it.
Oh, wow.
So I go back to the car to consult with Dave, and the guy comes over and he's saying, "Get in the car! Get in the car!" And I say, "Chakai," which means wait. And he slapped me in the face.
No.
Yeah. So I get in the car.
So it's culturally appropriate to slap people.
Well.
Or at least it happened, whether it's culturally appropriate or not.
Well, so anyway, once that happened, I quickly ran to the passenger side and got in the car, and that wasn't satisfactory enough for him. He crashed the pickaxe down on the hood of the car.
No.
Yeah, really. And poor Dorina, who's just hearing all this, but not seeing any of it, she's saying, she's apologizing and asking me if I'm okay, and she says, "Nothing like this would ever happen in America, would it?" I said, "Oh, Dory."
Yeah.
There are crazy people
Everywhere
in the world. Men with pickaxe and women who move traffic barriers.
That's right.
So
That's funny.
But probably the universal truth from that is that never argue with an angry man with a pickaxe.
Yeah, that's a good lesson to learn. That's awesome. So, living in Bulgaria, what's like one unique thing about that country, about living there that you experienced?
Okay. There's many things, but one that used to really baffle us was they were afraid of the cross breeze. Like, you could never ride in a car with windows open on both sides.
What?
Even if you have no air conditioning and it's 95 degrees. There's actually a folk saying that says Bulgarians are afraid of two things: being cheated and the cross breeze.
The cross breeze.
The cross breeze. So one day our language coach had come to us on the bus, and he was just dripping sweat.
Yeah.
And he said, "How can Americans travel in buses in the summer?" We said, well, as a proportion of the population, not that many people ride buses.
Yeah.
And if they do, they're air conditioned. And if the air conditioning didn't work, they'd have the windows open. And he said, on the bus?
So that was a big deal.
He said, wouldn't they be afraid of sitting by the open window? I said, no, Nedko, we've never heard of anyone being afraid of sitting by an open window. And he said, why didn't your mothers or your grandmothers teach you about this? He said, because they would have said, open the window so we can get a cross breeze.
That's fascinating.
So he went on to say, a friend of mine and I have been talking about how we've seen visitors from America, and they will even sleep with their windows open at night. I said, well, yes, if it's cool, of course we would. Yeah. And he said, and ride by an open window in the car. He said, but we noticed that they don't get paralyzed.
So that's the idea, that it would get paralyzed by a cross breeze.
Yes, the cold air would make them paralyzed.
Oh, interesting.
So Dave said, Nedko, people ride on motorcycles and they don't get paralyzed. He said, well, not all the way paralyzed, but just like really stiff, like stiff in the neck. And he and his friend decided how that happened was, how it didn't affect Americans was, Bulgarians always wear slippers or socks and never go barefooted on the floor. But Americans go barefooted.
Oh.
And so
we built up an immunity to the cross breeze.
Yes. So we get, our blood gets stronger by going barefooted. And so that obviously protects us from
That's fascinating.
the cross breeze.
I love that. That's awesome.
It wasn't just him, it was everybody. You couldn't open the windows at church.
Well, you're safe here because I have the window shut. Mostly because I don't want the loud sound, but also because I want to keep you safe from being paralyzed.
Thank you. I'm very appreciative of that.
So, if you were gonna share something that you want people to remember about serving globally and what that means, what would you remind us of today?
I would remind us that wherever you live in the world, you are going to make some kind of cultural gaffe.
Yeah.
And love and good humor can overcome that.
Yep.
And especially when you're learning a new language, you're not just going to make cultural gaffes, but, language gaffes. I remember one time telling a group of women at church that Dave and I had to leave to go to a grammar lesson. I said, "Nie trava da izlizvame." Vednaga, we have to leave right away. And one of the women said, Islis vame? I said, da, sega. Yes, right now.
Yeah.
And I was just like totally mystified. When we got to our grammar lesson, I explained it to our professor, and he said, you said Islis vame? I said, yes. He said, oh, Kathy, what you meant to say was Islizame. That means we leave. Islizvame means we lick each other.
Well, that's a very different.
Yeah.
That's a very different kind of experience. Yeah.
But
going to a grammar lesson or licking each other are
yeah.
just not quite the same.
So but the lady who was, so like horrified at what I said, I explained to her later that I made the mistake
good.
and that Professor Boris had explained the difference to me. But then thereafter,
you might have hurt your witness if you hadn't you hadn't given a more explanation.
Thereafter, she would often say to me, Islizvate. And we could laugh about it.
Yeah.
So if you could have a sense of humor,
I think it's one of the most important,
people.
have a sense of humor, when you're working cross-culturally.
Yeah, for sure. Because there are times when you can get really frustrated with the things that don't make sense to you, and you have to just try to laugh about them, or you would go crazy, or get angry, or get really worked up. I used to journal a lot about frustrating experiences and try to put a humorous tint on it, and it would help me relieve that tension of like this place is just stupid.
And probably helps you love them better because you're able to see them as humans, just like they're able to see you as humans. That's awesome.
For sure.
Well, what are you drinking? Since we're supposed to be talking.
Oh yeah.
What are you drinking? What kind of coffee? A mug?
I have my Bulgaria mug. It's my Starbucks Bulgaria.
That's awesome.
Thermos, yeah. And I drink only a little bit of coffee, a lot of milk, and sweetener.
So like an adult milkshake, an adult chocolate milk with a little bit of coffee in it. That's awesome.
Yeah. That's
awesome.
what I drink.
Well, I brought you, since you are in former missionary in car getting coffee, I brought you some El Salvador coffee that you and Dave can enjoy together, or take it up north to visit your family and drink it there when you're trying to watch the grandkids and need some extra energy.
Okay. Well, we'll need this weekend because we're leaving tomorrow. And Ryan and Becky are going to take a little time away, so we will have the 5-month-old twins and 4-year-old Anna to ourselves.
Which is a blessing for Ryan and Becky, I am sure, but I am also confident that is a unique experience for you.
We just love it. And I must say, for all those missionaries who are serving, who have children or grandchildren that they're separated from, that is truly a sacrifice.
Yeah.
There are numbers of people who don't get the joy of going and spending a weekend with their grandkids.
Yeah.
And so
absolutely.
We living in Bulgaria was an adventure. It was horrible. It was kind of like the best of times and worst of times. A very Dickens-like experience. But we are glad at this time of our life that we can be here and be with family.
That's awesome. Well, Kathy, thanks for joining me on this short journey, drinking some coffee, talking about ministry. We're so grateful for the decade of work that you and Dave put into the church in Bulgaria, and grateful that ministry continues today, that there's still great work happening there.